How many times do we make them without even thinking about the weight they carry? We say forever. We swear loyalty, eternal love, as if they were just words carried by the wind. But what if some promises were more than simple declarations? What if they had the power to transcend even death itself? In the Andes, there are stories that show that certain vows do not fade with time or forgetfulness. What begins as a promise of love can become a prison for those who leave and for those who stay. This is the story of a young man who believed in eternal love. He made a sincere vow, never imagining that his words would become an unbreakable bond between this world and the next. And when fate took his life too soon, his soul found no rest. Objects moving on their own, whispers in the silence of the night, an invisible presence refusing to leave. What happens when love surpasses the boundaries of life? How do you free someone who no longer belongs to this world, but still cannot leave it behind? If you believe that words are just words, perhaps this story will change your perspective. After all, how far does the impact of our promises reach? Are we truly ready to keep everything we say? Today, you will hear a story that defies logic, the laws of life, and even the borders between the living and the dead. And in the end, you may never look at a promise the same way again. He spoke the words without hesitation, looking into her eyes as if nothing in the world could change them. Asterisk, I promise to love you forever. Asterisk, it was such a common vow among lovers that no one ever stopped to consider what it truly meant. But in the Andean mountains, where stories pass through generations, words carry weight. Promises are not just declarations. They are commitments that echo beyond time. The young man was convinced that his love was unshakable, eternal, immune to the changes life would bring. But did he truly understand what he was binding himself to with that promise? Life is unpredictable, and what seems unbreakable today can crumble with a single breath of fate. How many people have made promises they could not keep? How many vows were spoken in the heat of the moment, only to be forgotten with time? In the Andes, promises are not seen as mere words in the wind. They carry a force that transcends existence. The young man did not know, but his vow would bind him to something far greater than he could ever imagine. After all, some promises cannot be undone without consequences. And life, as always, took its course, bringing unexpected challenges. Their love faced trials, but he never broke his word. Until the unexpected happened. When fate decided to act, he realized that the words spoken in a moment of passion could echo far beyond death. But what happens when an eternal promise becomes an unbreakable bond between this world and the next? The Andes hold secrets that defy modern logic. Among its mountains, ancient stories intertwine with the present, reminding us that the world of the living and the dead have never truly been separate. The elders say that certain promises create invisible ties, bonds that withstand time and even death. And those who ignore these truths pay a price. The young man, by promising eternal love, sowed something he did not understand. A seed that would grow in an unexpected way, crossing the boundary between this world and the next. Andean legends are full of warnings about the dangers of careless commitments. They speak of spirits that wander because something binds them, of voices whispering at night, seeking to fulfill promises left behind. These are not just stories to scare children. They are lessons about respecting what cannot be seen. In the Andes, death does not mean disappearance. Many believe that the dead remain close, watching, waiting, especially when something remains unfinished. And what the young man did not know was that his promise had created exactly that kind of bond. So, when the unexpected happened and life took its cruel course, his beloved felt a strange weight. It was not just grief, it was something more. Small signs began to appear, a whisper in the wind, a cold touch on the skin, a presence in the darkness. Was it imagination, coincidence, or a reminder that some promises are never forgotten? Since childhood, her grandmother had told her stories about the weight of words. Promises are not just words, girl. They are invisible threads that weave destinies. The young woman listened, but never took it seriously. To her, they were just tales from an old wise woman who liked to frighten children. But elders know what they are talking about. They understand that some truths require no proof, only respect. And when her boyfriend swore eternal love to her, she smiled, moved. never imagining that such an oath would not be forgotten, not even after death. The elders of the Andes have always taught that commitments made in the presence of nature are taken seriously by the universe itself. Couples who exchange vows under the moon, before the mountains, or by the river must understand that they are not alone. There are ancestral forces listening. The problem is that, in youth, promises are made with hearts full of emotion, but without considering the true weight of their words. Her grandmother had warned her. She said that everything spoken has consequences, especially in sacred moments. But who listens to the past when they are so focused on the present? So, when everything happened, the young woman began to recall her grandmother's words. But now, she could no longer ignore them. Small events started to challenge her. Objects not being where they should be, a cold breeze blowing when there was no wind, and that name, his name, whispered when no one else was around. Was it just grief playing tricks on her mind? Or were her grandmother's stories not just legends? Grief is already a difficult pain to bear, but what happens when it mixes with something unexplainable? The young woman missed her boyfriend like an emptiness that could never be filled, but there was something beyond that. It was as if he had never truly left. At night, she felt a presence beside her, a sudden chill at the nape of her neck, as if someone was there. At first, she tried to ignore it. She told herself it was her imagination, that her mind was simply trying to cope with the loss. But what happens when imagination leaves traces? Footprints in the earth, the impression of a shadow passing through a half-open door. At what point was this still just grief? She began to notice a pattern. Whenever she thought of him, something happened. The candle's flame flickered without wind, her engagement ring disappeared and reappeared in strange places. It was no coincidence. Something was binding her to that love, something that not even death could erase. The promise made in life now seemed like an unbreakable bond, an invisible knot between two worlds. The legend her grandmother always spoke of was not just a story. She was living proof that some words carry a weight beyond human comprehension. Time passed, but the feeling remained. He was there. But why? If death takes people away, why did he feel so close? What was keeping his soul from following its path? The young woman didn't know, but she would soon discover that love can be so strong that even death itself cannot break it. At first, she tried to convince herself that it was all in her imagination. But how could she explain the objects that moved on their own? The necklace he had given her would appear outside the drawer, even though no one had touched it. His scent, that familiar aroma of earth and wood, lingered in the air at unexpected moments. And then came the whispers. Low, almost inaudible, but they were there. They called her name just as she was about to sleep, made the candle flame flicker without any apparent reason. It was him. She was certain. The nights became a dilemma. If she slept, she dreamed of him, but the dreams were so real that they left her anguished upon waking. If she stayed awake, she felt his presence. The weight beside the bed, the shadow that seemed to move in the corner of the room. Was it a sign? A warning? Or was he trying to tell her something? She remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell about spirits that couldn't find rest. What if that was his case? What if his soul was trapped by something even death couldn't take away? She needed answers. She needed to understand what was happening before she lost her sanity completely. And so, she made a decision. She would seek someone who knew more. Someone who understood the mysteries of the invisible world and could help her put an end to this constant presence. If there was a way to free him, she needed to find it before it was too late. The decision to seek help wasn't easy. Deep down, part of her wanted to believe it was all just a delusion of grief. But with each restless night, with every inexplicable whisper, it became clear that something greater was at play. So, she followed her grandmother's advice and went to the village priest, a man with a serene gaze, but who carried in his eyes the weight of someone who had seen things few dare to believe. She told him her story, every detail, every sign, hoping he would laugh and say it was all just a trick of the mind. But that's not what happened. The priest listened in silence, nodding from time to time. When she finished, he took a deep breath and said the words she feared most. Your promise was more than just words. It was a pact. In the Andes, words carry energy, and when a commitment is made with an open heart, it does not disappear, not even in death. Her beloved was trapped between worlds, unable to move on because she still held onto the promise. as if grasping an invisible thread. The love was real, but now it needed to be set free. "You must undo the bond," he said. "But how do you undo something that was sealed with such truth?" The priest explained. "Ancient rituals required that the commitment be returned to the same place where it was made. Love must be honored, and sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing the other to go." His words echoed in her mind. How do you say goodbye forever? How do you let go of someone who has already left but still lingers? The idea of returning to the place where it all began made her heart heavy. The mountain where they had sworn eternal love now seemed different, colder, more solemn. But that was where she needed to be. The priest had said that words sealed destinies, and only words could undo them. So, with trembling hands, she held the ring he had given her and knelt at the very spot where they had once promised to stay together forever. The wind blew fiercely, as if nature itself was paying attention to what was happening. She knew what she had to say, but her throat tightened. How could she find the strength to set him free? With tears in her eyes, she spoke. "I loved you, and I still do, but now I let you go." Her words were not just a whisper carried away by the wind. They were a call, a rupture, a farewell. The ring slipped from her fingers and fell onto the ground, sealing the end of the promise. At that very moment, a warm breeze wrapped around her body, one last invisible embrace. For the first time in months, she felt peace. The mountain, once heavy and oppressive, now seemed light, as if it had witnessed a farewell long overdue. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a silence of closure, of a fulfilled mission. There were no shadows, no more whispers. Only the certainty that, wherever he was now free. But what about her? How could she move forward without carrying the weight of that love? How could she start over when her heart still remembered every detail? She remained there for a few moments, allowing the silence to fill the space once crowded with longing and pain. But this time, the longing was not a burden. It was a beautiful memory of something that once existed and could now rest. She smiled, not because the pain had vanished, but because she understood that true love does not bind, it sets free. Instead of bitter tears, she felt gratitude. Grateful for having experienced a love so strong it defied even death, for learning that promises are sacred commitments, and for finally understanding that some stories do not need a tragic ending. The descent from the mountain was different from the climb. The weight in her chest had lessened, and the wind that once chilled her skin now felt like a gentle touch, a kind farewell. When she arrived home, she noticed that his necklace, which had often appeared in strange places, was finally where it belonged, motionless. The candles no longer flickered on their own. The whispers had ceased. The silence was not an absence, it was peace. For the first time in a long while, she felt that he had truly departed to where he was meant to be. And that was the greatest proof that the promise had finally been fulfilled. Time would pass, and pain would turn into memory. She would learn to move forward, unafraid to love again, without carrying invisible chains. Because now she understood that true love is not measured by how long it lasts, but by the freedom it gives. And in the end, that was the greatest lesson of all. But do we all understand the weight of our words? How many still make promises without considering their consequences? And now, tell me, how many promises have you made without truly measuring their consequences? How many words have left your lips without you considering the weight they might carry? This story teaches us that some vows are not just beautiful phrases spoken in the heat of the moment. They can become invisible bonds, ties that not even death can break. If even true love had to be set free in order to move forward, what is still holding you back? What promises do you need to revisit to finally move on? We insist on holding on to what should have already left. We cling to the past, to feelings that have already served their purpose, to people who are no longer by our side. But isn't truly loving also about knowing when to let go? If you've ever made a promise you couldn't keep, maybe it's time to reassess, to learn to respect the weight of your words. Are you truly living your life? Or are you chained to promises you didn't even realize you made? Now, I want to hear your opinion. What did you think of this story? Have you ever made a promise that later turned out to be bigger than you imagined? Leave your comment and share this reflection. And if you want to keep exploring stories that bring powerful lessons like this one, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, Every story brings a lesson that can transform the way you see the world.